I'm sorry. Okay. One thing you can say about couples relationships is that we all have predictable patterns that we get into. Our unconsciousness, our stress, our conflict tends to show itself in patterns. And so if you look at those basic patterns that couples have, you can see that a lot of them break down into what I've called affectionately the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. That is that there are four interlocking patterns that consistently arise in couples. It's like built into our system, our operating system, you might say. And in the first lecture on this, I talked about the four patterns, which are attacking and defending, that's two, pursuing and withdrawing, that's the other two. And tonight we're going to talk mostly about pursuing and withdrawing, but if you think about it, a pursuer needs a withdrawer, an attacker needs a defender. Those are very important parts of the process because in couples counseling, I usually find that people want to blame the other person for their experience. They want to say, if you just changed, my life would be a lot better. And the fact is that that's I think it's called a zero-sum game. If you're both expecting the other person to change to make you feel better, then nobody's going to change. Nobody's going to transform. The transformation, the learning, the exploration has to come from within. So tonight we're going to focus on attacking and withdrawing. Pursuing and withdrawing. So what's really interesting about pursuing and withdrawing is if you think about it energetically, the pursuer is going like this. The pursuer is moving towards or into the relationship. And the withdrawer is going like this, like moving away from the relationship. And these are patterns that are built into us. Most of us have some version of pursuing and or withdrawing. And most of us actually switch back and forth. If you really study yourself, you'll notice that you will switch back and forth. People get typecast into certain roles, like you are the pursuer, you're always withdrawing. But actually, it's more layered than that. It's more complex than that. And there's a lot that we could study and say about the pursuer-withdrawer pattern. But in a short class, I'm just going to focus on a couple of key elements. One of them is, if you notice the pursuing and the withdrawing, the more the pursuer pursues, the more the withdrawer withdraws. So that's what's called like an interlocking pattern. The more the pursuer pulls away, the more the withdrawer pulls away, the more the pursuer goes after him or her. So then at a certain point, if you'll notice, you get tired of that, or it switches and the roles go into reverse. So that whole process is interlocking, and that's a key thing. It's like both of our unconsciouses are joining to create these consistent, replicatable, repeatable patterns. And at the basis of these patterns, these two patterns, is something that people don't understand. So I'm just going to say a little bit about it. The pursuer is generally afraid of being abandoned. They're afraid that the withdrawer is going to go so far away that they'll have some terrible feeling of abandonment. So that abandonment is a fear. It's a fear that most of us have, and it often shows itself in this pattern. Now, the withdrawer also has a fear. The withdrawer also has something that he or she is afraid of, and that is usually the feeling of being overwhelmed, or you could say criticized, or having somebody's energies overpower them. So the withdrawer is trying to protect their identity. They are trying to protect themselves from being overwhelmed. So their fear is like being squashed or being snuffed out or being overwhelmed by somebody else's feelings, judgments, criticisms. So what people focus on in these conversations is, sadly, you're pursuing, no, you're withdrawing, you're too much, no, you're always pulling away. And they don't go back down into the deeper, what we call the unarguable or the self-disclosing truth, which is, I'm afraid you're going to leave me, or I'm afraid that you're going to overwhelm me or take away my identity. So the whole path of healing for this, and I'll tell a little story about this in a moment, is to learn how to focus your attention inside yourself. That's where the exploration is really significant. That's where the exploration is most important. Not exploring what your partner did badly. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on that exploration, but a much more rich exploration is what am I doing inside myself? What is generating the fear? What does the fear feel like? How do I talk about the fear? So that's where you start turning in these patterns into material for the path. You start saying to yourself, if I can study myself, if I can study my reactions, if I bring consciousness, if I bring love to these patterns, they begin to change. And that's a fantastic aspect of human psychology, that these patterns actually can change and do begin to change when we bring some leverage to them, when we bring some consciousness. So if we repeat the patterns endlessly with no practice, no discipline, no insight, they will repeat. They will continue to repeat, and you understand that. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that through discipline, through consciousness, we can change these patterns. And I'll tell you a little story about how a couple did that. I had a kind of typical middle-aged couple, and the man was complaining in original sessions, beginning sessions, about his wife was always gone. She's always gone, and she actually had a job in which she had to be gone a lot. And so he would pursue her, and it's like, oh, I'm so frustrated. You're never home. We have a kid, and everything's so busy. I never get to spend any time with you. And instead of saying that in a way that was more vulnerable, like he was lonely or he was sad, you kind of feel the tension, like you never, you. And of course, his partner was very stressed out about moving in her job a lot, changing airports, getting to different cities, and then coming home and having a young child, and this pursuing, this angry pursuing. So it's a very difficult pattern. It's painful, and you can imagine like dozens of conversations about this. So what I was trying to do is walk the man through what we call self-disclosure, or the unarguable truth, and help him to see some of his internal process, some of the internal experience he was having. Instead of focusing on you're gone, you're never here, that's a complaint. Try to get him to talk more about himself. So he said, I'm frustrated, of course. I'm really frustrated. And so we're just asking along, well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. He said, well, I wanted to be in a relationship where there'd be a lot of love and intimacy. And so he said so I said, oh, well, you must be experiencing some kind of loss then. Like besides the complaint, you're feeling some loss of contact or some loss of intimacy. And he was like, yeah, that's really true. I never really thought of it that way. And he started to feel a little softer. You could kind of imagine his partner was like, well, not imagine, she actually was starting to move a little bit closer to him and like move towards him, because he was starting to say, oh, well, I miss you. That's so much more inviting of language if you think about that. And then what we do in counseling or in the practices in the book, you try to investigate, does that feel familiar? Have you created that experience in other relationships? Is there something about your family of origin, your parents, your caregivers? Is there something that reminds you of the fact that you're having this experience all the time, trying to make contact? And then he was like, well, no, oh. And then his partner says, well, didn't your mother work? Wasn't she gone a lot? And he goes, oh, yeah, let me think about it. Yeah, it does feel really familiar. I mean, I'm summarizing some sessions, but the point is that he's walking himself back into his own psychology, his own history, his own conditioning. And as he's doing that, his voice is starting to soften. He's thinking, oh, yeah, this is a really old experience I used to have, and I really have this strong intention to break out of it. And as I said before, then his partner, this woman named Julie, is moving towards him. It's like he's starting to feel more available and say what's really in his heart, and actually expose some of his own history and conditioning. And when he said, I really have this desire to connect with you more deeply and let go of my own frustration, my own impatience, and my own conditioning, she was like right there with that, because she could let go of the burden of being blamed and being complained about. And she could just let go. And there's this beautiful moment of connection where it's hard to describe. It's like this kinesthetic feeling of warmth, of vitality. He's opening up to something deep in himself. And his partner is like all there for that. It's like she's wanting to know him more deeply. And that bond of knowledge and information gives a strong feeling of intimacy, of emotional intimacy. So the process of him learning the communication model that we teach in the classes helps him to feel more vulnerable, helps her to move towards him, and helps to create this lovely moment of intimacy and depth, connection, warmth that we're all longing for, that we all want to have. So one of my goals in the next half hour, we'll pretty much end right about on time, is to help you understand this model a little bit more deeply.